Hey, welcome to Truth and Reality. I'm Ashley, and this podcast is about that, talking about the ups, the downs, the in-betweens of life, and how God and our faith fits into all of it. So welcome back. We're here with Melissa. Hey, Melissa.
Hello, Ashley.
Happy to be here. It is the month of February, and we
The
can't be
month
in
of love.
the month of love. We can't be in the month of love and not talk about an aspect of love. And so today and next week, we will be talking about vulnerability. And so this week, we're going to be talking about vulnerability with God and ourselves. And then the following week, we'll be talking about vulnerability with others in friendships and the people that we do life with. So, Melissa, are you ready to talk about
I am
vulnerability?
so ready. I have learned so much about vulnerability. I've learned a lot specifically in the last 4 years, but maybe even in the last year, I have learned a lot through your friendship, through growth, through healing, through counseling. And so I can't wait to dive into this topic today and chat more about this.
Awesome. Well, me too, kind of, because vulnerability for me has been something I've avoided like at all costs in my life because vulnerability is risk, right? Risking
Mhm.
somebody seeing us, knowing us, and we're kind of putting ourselves out there and it feels as though like we're unprotected. And so in my life, I have maybe avoided vulnerability and showing my true self in relationships and with others, but truly, honestly, with myself and God too, because I had this feeling in the sense that I had to self protect, or if someone truly knew me, then I'd feel like the greatest rejection of who I really am. So, vulnerability has been something over the last 5 years that I've really grown in, and I've really learned that vulnerability, yes, it takes risk, but it's one of the most courageous acts we can do. And it's really what connects us and bonds us with others is being willing to risk vulnerability. And as I've been met with empathy, not rejection. I've been
Yep.
met with compassion and love and
Yep.
not all this other fear that's kind of taken, place in my mind. I've actually been met with the opposite, which was so beautiful. So what
Yeah.
about you? Where was your take on vulnerability, prior to I don't know, maybe the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've struggled with it in the same regard. I can't say when that pivotal point was, but I think I held my cards close. I think even with God, like I just wanted him to view me a certain way, and maybe our relationship was very surface level. I think it took probably after Matt's passing that I had to become more vulnerable and more real and authentic with him about how I felt and the struggles that I had dealt with. Like, why didn't you heal him? And how am I here raising 4 kids on my own? And I think just specifically probably in the last year, Ashley, I think I've come to a level of vulnerability friendship wise, which you can probably attest to, vulnerable with my family, even a vulnerable place with God, saying like, this isn't where I saw myself, but I know that you're still good in it. That
Mhm.
I thought things would have shown up differently. I thought life would look a little bit differently. And so I think it's a constant journey of growth and challenging myself spiritually, and just emotionally to be vulnerable with those around us. And I know next week we're going to talk about friendship, but we just even had a recent dinner and one of my friends had expressed, like, oh, it took a while for you to be vulnerable. And I'm like, no, it didn't. And the more I thought about it, I was like, she's right. So I think it's a challenge for all of us to be vulnerable. And I think that's why you and I decided this was a topic to talk about, because I think everyone can ring true to it and test to that it's a struggle, but yet there's beauty in it if you're willing to grow, willing to be empathetic, willing to be compassionate, and to take that level of vulnerability to another level.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's I agree with you. And I think most of my life I've wanted relationships that were meaningful and deep and you could connect with people. And I think as I've learned vulnerability and learned, the safe places to be vulnerable, it's not every place is a safe place to
mhm.
be vulnerable, that I've really stepped into creating those relationships. I'm tending to now turn towards the friendship part, but we're going to
Mhm.
swerve and kind of talk
Yep.
about like
Yeah.
vulnerability with ourselves and
Yep.
God. I think that's where I really started. That's where, 5 years ago when my life fell apart, I previously held this like my cards close, like you're saying, or held this facade that everything's good, things are okay, I can manage. But deep down, I was really struggling and I needed connection. I needed help. I needed, to even be real with myself about my life and
Mhm.
what was going on at the time and the brokenness of my marriage. And I thought, you know, I had nothing left to give or to do. It's like when you hit ground zero, it was
Right.
bearing my soul to God. Like you said, here is what I'm struggling with. Here are my concerns. What I thought God would do, he didn't do. So what does God really do? There was that deconstructing of my faith. And I feel like in that place where I had to be honest with myself and I could be honest with God, I feel like that's where true vulnerability and healing began. And it
Yeah.
was so interesting because in that, like, God knows. He knows
Yep.
our hearts. He knows
Yep.
us. He created us more than
Yep.
we know ourselves. But I think he's a gentleman. And so he's not going to barge into our lives and start
Mm-mm.
moving, shaking, healing, whatever. He allows us our free will and our
Yep.
free choice. And
Yep.
so for me, that was a huge space where God was inviting me into this vulnerability with him. And it didn't look like what the Christian version I thought it should
Yep.
look like. I thought spending time with God and growing with God was like always opening my Bible, doing the devos, having the
Mhm.
time. And it really all shattered. And it
Yep.
was in that desperation of like, I want to hear from God. I want to talk to God. And that seeking that relationship looks so different than what I thought it would be. Yeah, reading your Bible is important. That's so
Mhm.
crucial. I'm not saying
Yep.
that. I'm saying relationship with God goes beyond that to this
Yep.
interaction where he invites us into space with him. That was a
Yep.
lot. But like what
No.
have you experienced? Because I know we've had different experiences, but we've had a lot of commonalities in how we sit with God and talk with God now. So what does vulnerability with God look like for you?
Yep. And I just want to chime in on one thing that you said, that God is a gentleman. And I think for me, you said he held your hand and he took you along. For me, he said, I will wait for you. And I will
Mhm.
wait for the time that you will get to the place where you can trust me again, Melissa, because I felt like I had all my walls up of vulnerability. Like, not to say I didn't trust people, but I was like, truly, I did not trust God, thinking like this was your outcome. This was you being good. And so I think it's a place that I've learned to be vulnerable with him and have honest conversations and be saying, God, I'm frustrated by this place I saw myself in life. I don't feel qualified to be a single mom. But then using it in exchange and say, but I know that through you and in you, I'm able. And so I think having really honest conversations with God about the places I'm at in my life and really surrendering those fears, those worries and doubt, and seeing what he's giving me in exchange. And so I think it has been a process. I think it has not come easy. I think, like I said, I had a lot of walls up. I don't think intentionally. I think after you walk through something as hard as you did, or I'm doing, I think you look at life a little bit differently. And so I had to keep remembering that God was good, that God was even in the pain, that he was even in my questions. He was even in me putting up walls, that the walls had nothing to do with him, but I thought all of my pain was directly because of him. And so I think it's a process. And I think if you can surrender and give those big things, whatever it is, mine happened to be, losing a spouse, yours was your marriage, giving that to God and saying, you know what, I'm going to be vulnerable with you and say, this isn't where I saw my life, but I trust that you're good in it. This new, I don't even know what you call it, new chapter opens up of you seeing this really good God in really deep spaces of your life. And I think I've shared that with you, is that I have a deeper level of trust, of love with God. Even my situation and story, that I've seen his goodness even in the midst of really, really hard things the last 4 years. And so out of it has birthed something really, really beautiful, me being vulnerable with him. And he was waiting for me all along, you
I
know.
love
Um,
that. And I love
third-
that picture.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because like God already knows everything that's happened to us, right? And the reasons why everything happened to us and the thoughts and the emotions and the feelings and where we're at. I love that you said like when he met you, he walked you through all of those things. Cause I felt like that was the same for me. When I entered that space, he's there, he's waiting, he's
Mhm.
prompting, he's waiting for us to be like, oh, okay. And I think for me, I had to say, God, help me. God,
Yep.
help me to be honest and vulnerable with you and myself. And how did I do
Mhm.
that? It was like slow steps, like you said. And when you brought your questions and your emotions and your feelings, I feel like in that vulnerability, God might not have given you or I specific answers we wanted or maybe thought we wanted. But what I felt like he did specifically for me was he either shifted my question or
Mm-hmm.
he took away the lie I was believing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that process that's the process of healing where I always wanted healing to be to like right the wrong, fix
Yep.
it, make it good
Yep.
in the natural realm. And I think that my perspective on healing now is really God healing what was really needed to be healed, which was my identity, which was my thought processes, which were the lies that I believed about myself or God or others.
Yep.
And this forgiveness process too, it's almost as if this vulnerable space that God invited me into, he allowed me to see the lies I believed or the
Mm-hmm.
things I had to let go of. And as he gently, held my hand through that or waited with you through those
Mm-hmm.
things, that's that building of trust process. I felt like that was truly made. And it's kind of hard work. It's not
Yeah.
hard work like all this effort, but it's like courageous work to
Yep.
sit there, right? And to
Right.
be honest with him.
Yeah, and I feel like the word that he gave me was like surrendering the struggle, surrendering the pain, like exchanging it, giving it to him. And I remember him saying so many times, like, I'm not surprised that you're here. Even 4 years
Yeah.
later, I'm single and doing parenting alone in a sense, right? He's not surprised that I'm here. And so I think just that reassurance of like, God, you knew this story, you knew the narrative of my life. You're not surprised by it. Your grace has been in it, right? There's been joy in it. Yes, there's been pain and hard work. Like you said, I think it hasn't come without effort. And it's really me loosening my grip and just giving him, that pain, that the expectation, just even just trusting him again, that God, I'm going to trust you with my story. I'm going to trust you with the narrative. I'm going to trust you that there's good ahead. I feel really hopeful this year, Ashton. I don't know what it is for 2024, that God has great things for our family. And I have to honestly say, like, it took a long time to feel that. And so I am grateful to be in this place where I feel like without that vulnerability, I wouldn't be here, standing here today, hopeful and encouraged, but it took work. And so I didn't expect to
Yeah.
get them. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. I mean, that's good. That's vulnerability. What what I loved what you said is it took hard work. And then you immediately said it took me surrendering and releasing. So it's
Mm-hmm.
so interesting because the hard work isn't Melissa fixing herself or Ashley
Mm-hmm.
fixing herself. It's
Mm-hmm.
releasing our hearts and our disappointment and our pains and our hope and our expectation to God. And
Yep.
that's the place where I have seen you, and I've actually walked through too, that I'm not disregarding that it's not effort, it's hard work, but it's the work of releasing to God and
Mm-hmm.
having open hands, which I think is so huge. So then in that space of vulnerability, and I've seen you bravely do this too, you're saying, here, God, is all I wanted. Here's
Mm-hmm.
all I thought and hoped. It's not actually what I saw. So now, can you come in and you do a miracle and you heal and
Mm-hmm.
you walk me through? And
Mm-hmm.
that intimate relationship, I feel like for me, and as your friend watching you, has
Mm-hmm.
shifted your heart and your perspective and your relationship with God to really showing like him fueling you. And now
Yep.
you can see like the joy and the love and what he has for you bubbling over you, right?
Yep.
Where
Yep.
you really let him into that space. That's so,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
so
I said, letting him in that space was really opening my hands. And what I saw in those hands were broken, shattered pieces of my
yeah.
life, shattered dreams, right? Shattered plans. Cancer came in, right? Shattered dreams for my kids and what our future looked like. And I pretty much said, okay, God, this is yours, because this is not
Mhm.
where I saw this. This is not where I thought this would be. So you got to I mean, it was that real, like I'm talking in that tone, how I talk to God, whether that's nice or not, and just said, you have to make something beautiful of this. If this is the narrative of my life, then show up, and I
Yes.
have him, I mean, in such beautiful, even if it's small ways, really, really beautiful ways that he's shown up, you know?
Mhm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, and it's so like he says in the Bible, he takes beauty from ashes, right?
mhm,
And he's close to the brokenhearted. And he's the healer, he's the creator, he's the craftsman. He's orchestrating all of these pieces of our lives. And that was really hard for me to hear in the depth of my grief and my loss, that like God works all things for good. And I, at that point, would say, how could he work this for good? And
right.
now here I am, 5 years post that space. And I'm sitting here being like, yes, God works all
Mhm,
things for good. I couldn't see it here, but
mhm,
that's the where the word of God, you say by faith, you speak by faith, you are real and honest with God. It's like, I don't know how you're going to do this.
right,
And then you walk forward trusting the word of God and trusting God. And that's the hard part. I had to say, God, help me trust you. Help
right.
me in this next step. But truly seeing from this vulnerability that God has, welcomed us into, and he welcomes all of us into with
Mhm,
him. He's really taken ashes and brought beauty. He's really taken dead things and reformed and brought new life out of them.
yep.
And what is that? Romans 8:28. He works all things for the good,
Thing, yep,
who
love
are
him.
called according to his purpose. And it's this deep conviction now that I have because one, I knew the truth. Secondly, he just walked me through it. Now
Yep.
I've experienced the truth. And that came in that vulnerability with God, which is so like exciting for
Well,
me.
and I know we'll talk about it next week with friendship, but that's the same way as what God walked me through. You have to have friendships that you can be vulnerable with, and they continue. And you and I have talked about this, walking along the journey with you. You know, I celebrated my birthday 2 weeks ago, and you and I sat with some friends at the table, and I was so grateful and thankful that you guys have walked through a journey with me of being vulnerable, being honest with where I'm at, loving me. And I think in that same regard, having a God that walks alongside you through the good, through the hard, and just trusting that he'll always be there every step of the way, even on the really, really hard days and
Hmm.
even on the good days, he's still there, wanting
Yes. Yeah.
us. I think that's been so key of this journey is trusting him, even in the hard spaces, even in, those shining moments that he's going to work it out, better than we
Yeah.
think, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's a good bridge to even talk about, when you build vulnerability with God, when you are honest with yourself, you're honest with God, you build trust with God, that naturally bridges into he wants us in community and relationships with others.
Hmm.
And so, I had to learn how to be honest with myself and God first in order to even step into that space. Like you're saying, with you or other friends that we have, or even my family members, there was a certain level of vulnerability I wouldn't go to. I had to first find that with God. And I felt like he had to develop in me and really solidify my identity for me. Because once that's set with him, then I can enter into these other spaces of vulnerability in
Yeah.
in a healthy way, in a protected way that knows that all of me and who God made me to be is really with him. And so
Yep.
that vulnerability space and learning those boundaries allowed me to drop the walls. I felt like
Right.
God said he'll protect me.
Right.
Before I was self-protecting, I was throwing up walls that kept the good and the bad out.
Right.
After I walked through my hard situation, I threw up all these walls to keep everything out because I didn't want to get hurt. And I
Right.
think God so lovingly started taking the bricks off of my wall, right?
Right.
Around me. And he was saying, okay, I'll take this one down. Will you trust me? And in that space of vulnerability with God, I felt like he said, Ashley, I'll protect you.
Yep.
I'll be your guard. You don't have to self protect because my self protection, which I was trying to keep myself safe, just isolated me, right?
Yep.
And it isolated me from the friendships like that we could have had or couldn't have had, right? If that wouldn't have
Yeah.
fallen.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting that you look at your walls as bricks because I look at them as like wood. And so then it's like I'm pulling back the layers. Like the Lord is like, I want to get
Mm.
into those spaces. And I think for people listening right now or just even listening, to this, I think it's hard, right? To pull back. Sometimes we don't even realize the walls we put up. Right. Maybe
Mhm.
they've been, I mean, I had a scenario 2 weeks ago and I think you called me out on it. Like, I think you're coping and I think you have your walls up. And I'm like, I'm not. And then I'm like, she's right. I do. I don't think intentionally we always try to. It's a level of self protect. So I feel like if someone is listening to this today feeling like, where would I even start? I think it's a place where you're just saying to God, like, I surrender these walls. I surrender these places that maybe I put walls up unintentionally, and help me, God, to surrender these things and these
Mhm.
situations to you. Help me be vulnerable with you. Help me be honest with you, because it's not something I was really good at or something I did prior to, I think, that big pivotal moment for me of losing that. So,
Mhm. Yeah, no, and I think that's good. Like, where do you start? Start with God, right?
mhm,
Be vulnerable and open and honest. Allow Him to show you and
mhm,
reveal to you the places, like you're saying, where He wants you to maybe like let your wall down with Him, or let Him into that space so He can help take the walls
mhm.
down. I think too, as you build trust with God, like you're saying, and you're just open to ask the question, like, God, if I speak to you, if I ask you, if I'm real with how I feel about my situation or this particular thing, like, will you meet me there? That's a beautiful place to start.
Mhm.
Um and then I think too, like, I don't know, I felt unprotected for a while. Like I was
Mhm.
like, oh no, all my walls are down, right?
Right.
And so I think that's that space when you've built trust with God and your walls start coming down, He alerts you what's a
Yep.
safe situation.
Yep.
He alerts you, oh, we're not going to share this here. I think you learn as you go, and it's like this fluid. I've had situations where I've been very vulnerable, and then I was like, "Ooh, that didn't feel like a good space. I'm going to back up here." And
Right.
then other situations where, over time, I've been vulnerable and I've been open and I've been met with beautiful empathy and connection with friendships. I think it's an ebb and flow, and you figure out your circles and where God
Yep.
wants you to go. But I think that starting place is with God, to really lay that foundation, because He's really our guard, He's really our
Yep.
protector, but He's also that comfort, and He's also that healer that wants to come into those spaces in our life and bring healing. I mean, there's
Yep.
so many things that I've dealt with over the last 5 years that, if I wouldn't have brought them to God, if I wouldn't have laid, my fears or these anxieties or my triggers before the Lord, I'd still be dealing with them if I
100%.
hadn't let Him in. And I'm so glad that I did, even though that was challenging and emotional. He
Yep.
brought so much healing that, like, I'm like, whoa, I just want to be like, freedom's worth it, people. Like, this is really worth it.
Right. No, I was just going to say, and it's probably an uncomfortable space to sit in at first, or it's going to feel foreign or feel like something you've never done. But I would encourage people listening that it's like, it's a safe space, right? You can trust God. Maybe you haven't trusted Him before, but it's like you can trust Him in those moments of letting down those walls slowly, where it's like trusting Him with your emotions, trusting Him with your vulnerability, of being honest. Maybe you're disappointed by an outcome in your life or something that's happened, or a situation you're currently in that you're like, how is God in it? I
Mhm.
think trusting Him and knowing that He's in it. He sees your pain, He sees your joy, He sees your struggle, and He wants to walk alongside you through that place of vulnerability and help you.
Yeah, no, and I agree. That's so good. And He comes in, like we said, He's a gentleman.
Hmm.
He comes in, He knocks, He prompts, He's always waiting, speaking, talking with this lovingness. I think that it took me a while to see God that way. I think I had to actually watch part of The Chosen, whether people love that or don't
Yep.
love that,
Yep.
to see Jesus as this loving, compassionate, full of like exuberant love for
Hmm.
me, where I could picture Him like hugging me or meeting me in my pain, and seeing that He comes in and like shines light ever so gently on what
Yep.
He wants to highlight for you, and
Yep.
then slowly walks you through to the degree that's super personal, like super my pace, super my personal. And it stretches me, but He knows just at the pace and what I need, where He doesn't come in and like, you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't gonna go well. Like, yeah, it could be
Right.
emotional. Yes, it's challenging, but it's in this way that is so personal and
Yep.
so kind, is just kind
Yep.
of, yeah.
No, I'm grateful. Grateful for the places that he's walked with us, the places of vulnerability that we've let him in, right? And continue to let him in. I think it's a journey. Vulnerability is a journey, and we'll talk about it next week with friendship. I think it's a work in progress. And I think just letting God into those spaces and places, and just even starting today, if it's never something you've done before, I think it's so beautiful to see what he can do, even though it feels scary. Like you said, you kind of feel like, okay, what am I doing? It's like trusting him, like even it's a verbal confession of, God, I trust you, even though I'm sharing my heart and things that I haven't shared with you before, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And the thing that I wrote down, and I write this in my journal a lot, isn't it so funny? I do this. I like, right, trusting God is a sure risk. It feels risky, but it's something that's like, he doesn't fail. He doesn't
Yep.
let you down. It might not be my expectation or my thoughts, but he comes through. Like,
Yep.
he's a good God. He's a gentle God. He's a
Yep.
strong God. There are many things that he is, but he's a sure risk.
Yep.
Um, I write that a lot. I just realized that right when you said that. I'm like,
I
huh.
to do that. I like that. That's a good illustration. I like that.
Yes. So, thank you, Melissa, for sharing and being vulnerable and open. Thanks for joining us. Next week, we're going to be talking about vulnerability with others and how this place of vulnerability with God allows us to step into relationship and community with others in a healthy way. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook at Peace Runs Deep. And thanks for hanging out with us today.